What if I told you that one of Hollywood's toughest legends, Clint Eastwood, was never meant to succeed? That the man who stared down villains on screen, once nearly drowned in shark-infested waters, battled anxiety that almost crushed his career, and kept entire chapters of his personal life hidden for decades? Clint Eastwood's story isn't just about stardom. It's about rebellion, scandal, survival, and the kind of grit that shaped him into an icon. Let's pull back the curtain and see what his life really looks like now. Clint Eastwood came into this world with a bang. Born in San Francisco in 1930, he weighed a whopping 11 pounds, leaving the hospital nurses stunned. They nicknamed him Samson, a name that seemed fitting for a boy who would one day grow into a towering Hollywood figure. But Clint's early years weren't glamorous. His father, Clint Sr., struggled to hold steady jobs. The Eastwood family moved constantly throughout the Great Depression, never settling long enough to feel grounded. Yet by the 1940s, the family landed in Piedmont, California, a wealthy suburb where Clint suddenly found himself surrounded by privilege. On the outside, life looked easy. There was a swimming pool in the backyard, a country club membership, and the promise of stability. But Clint wasn't thriving. School was a nightmare. He was held back for poor grades, forced into summer classes, and eventually kicked out of Piedmont High for rebellious stunts. His school spirit involved obscene graffiti and even setting fire to an effigy on school grounds. Transferring to Oakland Technical High gave him another shot, but Clint's mind wasn't on textbooks. He preferred fast cars, long afternoons on the golf course, and hours pounding piano keys until his fingers bled. Teachers urged him toward acting, but Clint brushed them off. At that point, no one, including Clint himself, thought he'd have a future in Hollywood. But that aimless, rebellious kid was about to face an experience so intense it would shape the rest of his life. In 1951, Clint's life took a sharp turn. Drafted during the Korean War, he expected to see combat overseas. Instead, he landed a relatively cushy assignment as a swimming instructor at Fort Ord in California. Safe, right? Not exactly. On September 30, 1951, Clint hitched a ride back to base from Seattle. What seemed like a quick flight became a nightmare. The weather turned vicious. The plane's door flew open mid-air. Then the oxygen failed, the radios went silent, and just when things couldn't get worse, the fuel ran out. The pilot was forced to ditch the plane into the freezing Pacific Ocean. Clint and the pilot inflated tiny rafts, but the ocean wasn't forgiving. Waves slammed Clint's raft and flipped it over, forcing him into the open water. For hours, he swam through pitch-black seas, fighting exhaustion, hallucinations, and the very real threat of sharks. Depending on who you ask, he swam 2 miles, or maybe 4. Either way, it was a miracle he survived. That night could have been his last, but Clint made it to shore, barely conscious, his body wrecked but alive. Years later, when he played an inmate escaping Alcatraz by swimming through the frigid San Francisco Bay, audiences believed every second. Why? Because Clint Eastwood had lived it. That brush with death gave him something few actors ever have, an authentic toughness forged in survival, and Hollywood was about to notice. Before he became a star, Clint's life was anything but glamorous. He worked odd jobs, logging trees in Oregon, guarding swimming pools, and even playing ragtime piano in a bar. But fate has a way of testing the unprepared. At a Malibu party, Clint casually met director Howard Hawks, a connection that opened the first real door into acting. Soon after, he landed work at Universal Studios, though at first he was typecast as just another handsome face. Then came the big break. Clint was cast in Rawhide, a TV western that ran for 8 seasons. His rugged looks and brooding presence stood out, and he became a household name. But it wasn't Rawhide that cemented his legend. It was Italy. In the 1960s, Clint teamed up with director Sergio Leone for the Dollars trilogy, including A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. These spaghetti westerns transformed him into an international star. Audiences were captivated by his steely gaze, minimalist lines, and the sense that Clint Eastwood wasn't acting, he was just being. But fame doesn't come without tragedy, and Clint was about to learn how brutal Hollywood could be. By the 1970s, Clint Eastwood was at the peak of his power. He swapped cowboy boots for a badge and became Dirty Harry, the relentless San Francisco cop who didn't play by the rules. The role tapped into America's appetite for gritty justice, and Clint became the face of law and order cinema. Audiences loved it, critics debated it, and Clint kept pushing forward. He mixed action with humor in Every Which Way But Loose, where he shared the screen with an orangutan named Clyde. But even while the box office exploded, darkness followed him on set. During the filming of Dothlate in 1975, tragedy struck. David Knowles, a professional climber and stuntman, was killed in a rock slide while working on the film. Another climber was badly injured. The scene eerily mirrored what they had been filming just days earlier. Clint was devastated. He considered shutting down production entirely, but the crew urged him to continue, believing it would honor Knowles' sacrifice. The world saw Clint as an untouchable action star, but behind the camera, he was wrestling with guilt, grief, and a personal life that was far messier than the characters he played. If Clint's career was defined by control, his love life was the opposite, chaotic, complicated, and filled with secrets. In 1953, he married Maggie Johnson. On the surface, it looked like a stable, traditional marriage, but Clint quickly grew restless. Affairs became a pattern, some public, others hidden for decades. One of those affairs resulted in a daughter, Lori Murray, who was placed for adoption without Clint's knowledge. He wouldn't meet her until the 1990s. Another long-term affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis produced a daughter, Kimber, in 1964. Then came Sandra Locke, an actress he met in the 1970s. Their relationship lasted more than a decade, but ended in lawsuits and accusations that Clint had manipulated her career and pressured her into painful decisions. While still with Locke, Clint also had 2 children with flight attendant Jocelyn Reeves, Scott and Catherine. If that wasn't enough, Clint later had a daughter, Francesca, with actress Frances Fisher. His second marriage to news anchor Dina Ruiz brought another daughter, Morgan, but ended in divorce after nearly 2 decades. Altogether, Clint Eastwood is known to have at least 8 children with multiple women. Some relationships were hidden until adulthood, fueling decades of speculation and tabloid headlines. And yet, for all the scandals, Clint's career didn't falter. If anything, his chaotic personal life mirrored the complexity of the roles he would take on next. By the 1980s and 1990s, Clint Eastwood was no longer just a star. He was a filmmaker with something deeper to say. His characters grew more complex. In Firefox, he played a pilot haunted by trauma. In Tightrope, he was a cop obsessed to the point of destruction. And in White Hunter Blackheart, he portrayed a director consumed by his own ego. But then came Unforgiven. Clint returned to the Western genre that made him famous, but this time as an aging outlaw tormented by his violent past. The film won multiple Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Suddenly, Clint wasn't just the tough guy. He was the storyteller, the craftsman, the legend who could turn his own myth inside out. And as he grew older, his roles would only get more fascinating. In the 2000s, Clint Eastwood fully embraced age on screen. In Space Cowboys, he played a retired astronaut finally getting his shot at the stars. In $1 Million Baby, he was a weary boxing trainer who finds redemption in unexpected ways. And in Gran Torino, he became the grizzled veteran who confronts his own prejudice. These roles weren't glamorous. They were raw, often painful explorations of mortality and regret, but audiences loved them. Clint had become more than a star. He was a cultural symbol, someone who embodied resilience in the face of time itself. Even in his 90s, Clint didn't slow down. He starred in Cry Macho and kept directing films that challenged audiences to think about legacy, morality, and what it means to grow old without giving in. But as his career flourished, whispers began to grow. People wondered, had Clint Eastwood finally stepped away from the spotlight? For over a year, Clint Eastwood wasn't seen in public. Fans grew anxious. Was Hollywood's toughest man finally fading? Then, in 2023, he reappeared, smiling, bearded, and full of life at a Jane Goodall conservation event in Carmel, the same town he once served as mayor. Far from fading, Clint looked healthy, sharp, and engaged. He wasn't just attending events, he was back at work, directing the courtroom drama Juror No. 2. At 93 years old, Clint Eastwood was still behind the camera, still calling the shots. His secret? Discipline. He eats a low-fat, high-protein diet, avoids excess, and has stayed active his entire life. His son Scott Eastwood credits him as the ultimate fitness role model. And while his love life was once a headline circus, Clint eventually found quiet companionship with Christina Sandera, who stood by him for nearly a decade. Until her passing in 2024, the two shared their lives together in Carmel, enjoying the peace that Clint had spent a lifetime chasing. So what do we make of Clint Eastwood's story? He was the rebel kid who didn't care about school, the soldier who survived a crash that should have killed him, the actor who turned chance opportunities into a career, and the man who never let scandal or age stop him. Clint Eastwood is more than just an actor or director. He's proof that survival isn't about perfection, it's about grit, resilience, and the will to keep going no matter how many times life tries to drag you under. And maybe that's his real legacy, not the gunslingers, Not the cops, not even the Oscars, but the simple truth that sometimes just refusing to quit is enough to make you a legend,